Why did no one look at her when she stepped off the helicopter? Was it because she looked too young, too small, too ordinary? Or was it because, in a place where men built legends with grit and scars, silence was invisible? The desert sun didn't rise, it ignited. It blazed over the barren ridges of southern Afghanistan like a torch thrown onto dry kindling. Heat shimmered in the air, bending the horizon, swallowing the mountains in a haze that made everything feel farther away. More unreal, the outpost buzzed with its usual noise. Boots grinding over gravel, clipped radio chatter, metal doors slamming shut, the growl of generators, and then the storm of dust. Whipped into the air by rotor blades, a Black Hawk touched down, shaking the earth, drowning out voices. Dust swallowed the landing pad. Wrapping everything in a sandstorm, soldiers shielded their eyes. A few looked up curiously. And out of that storm stepped someone no one expected, Sergeant Lily Kane, 23 years old. Barely 5'6", raven black hair tied neatly under her cap. Pale freckles on her face, the kind that made her look more like a college kid walking out of a library than a soldier stepping into a war zone. Her duffel looked heavier than she did, and in her right hand, clutched with a kind of reverence, was a long black hard case. Inside it, a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, the kind of weapon that could destroy a truck engine or shatter a wall. A weapon designed for monsters, carried by a girl who looked like she might vanish in the desert wind. No swagger, no war stories painted in scars. She moved quietly, eyes forward, as if nothing else existed. The Marine snipers barely looked up. To them, she was another rookie shipped out of training with polished scores and no dirt under her nails. But the Navy SEALs, louder, rougher, sharper around the edges, didn't hide their judgment. One of them muttered just loud enough for the others to hear, "Sniper Barbie." There was laughter, dry, dismissive, the kind of laughter that stuck to your skin like sand. She didn't answer, didn't flinch, didn't even look in his direction. She just shifted the rifle case higher on her shoulder and walked through the storm of dust toward the sniper barracks, as if there were a mission waiting that only she could see. It wasn't arrogance, it was focus. Inside the barracks, Lieutenant Alex Rohr lifted his eyes from the dim glow of his laptop. He was the team's lead sniper, a man built of stone and combat scars. 14 years in the sand, steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. He studied her from a distance, the way she carried her gear. The careful, deliberate movements. Most rookies unpacked like they were camping. She unpacked like a surgeon, prepping for a life or death procedure, one piece at a time, laid out with precision. Every click, every strap, every screw, exact. Rohr leaned back in his chair. He muttered to Staff Sergeant Lyle, the crusty sniper with a thick southern drawl. "That's Kane?" Lyle nodded, chewing on a toothpick. "Yep. Top of her class, some kind of ballistic savant. They called her the human rangefinder." Rohr grunted. "Great. Another perfect on-paper shooter." He'd seen it before. Kids who could split playing cards at 1,000 yards on a range back home, but froze when the target bled. When chaos screamed back, they didn't last. Combat didn't forgive math. Still, he said nothing more. He just watched, that night, while most of the Marines gathered in the rec tent, laughing, watching old fight replays, trading smokes. Lily Kane was alone at the range. Again, but she wasn't firing. Not yet. She lay flat against the dirt, watching the canyon walls, tracking how the wind curled through the rocks. She studied how the temperature dropped degree by degree as the sun sank, how the mirage lines shimmered, bending the world in ways that could make a bullet miss by feet. She logged it all, her handwriting tight, methodical, across the pages of a weathered leather notebook. At one point, Briggs, one of the SEAL snipers, loud, cocky, the same one who'd called her Sniper Barbie, wandered over. His smirk was as heavy as his steps. "You ever going to pull the trigger, rookie?" She didn't look at him, just turned her head slightly. "Not until the shot's ready." He laughed. "This isn't a classroom. You wait for ready out here. You're dead." No reaction, no argument, just silence. Then, without a word, she opened her case. Piece by piece, she assembled the Barrett with delicate precision. She adjusted the scope, clicked the stock, set the bipod. Each move was slow, calm, exact. Finally, she lowered herself behind the rifle. Her finger brushed the trigger. Breath slowed. A single crack split the desert night. 1,200 yards. Dead center. Briggs blinked. His smirk faltered. "Lucky," he muttered, but his voice carried less certainty than before. She chambered again. Fired. Another hit. And another. Each shot clean. Perfect. Then she packed up, methodical as before, and walked back to the barracks. No words, no applause, no need. That became her rhythm. Day after day, silent, focused. Ghost-like, the others started calling her the ghost. But what they didn't see was the work. The endless hours after lights out. Maps spread across her bunk. Elevation charts taped to her wall. Wind drift equations filling page after page. She balanced pencils on her rifle barrel, training her trigger pull until it didn't even disturb the balance. She built her own dummy targets from scrap metal, measuring them to mimic human dimensions at impossible ranges. Roar, who had once dismissed her as a paper shooter, started to notice. One evening, passing by the range, he stopped. She was firing at a target barely visible to the naked eye. Curious, he grabbed his scope, dialed in 2,000 yards. The shot landed an inch left of center. She fired again. Dead center. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" he asked, stepping behind her. Without turning, she said, "Math." He laughed once. "Math won't save you when the wind shifts mid-flight." This time she turned, meeting his gaze. Calm, certain. "No, but understanding it means I'll know when it will." No arrogance, just truth. For a long second, Roar just studied her. Then he nodded and walked away. Word spread. Slowly, quietly. The SEALs mocked less. Their laughter carried less weight. Some, though they'd never admit it, started taking notes when she trained. But she didn't change. She remained silent, ghost-like. And yet, doubt still clung to her, because numbers meant nothing until they met chaos. Calculations didn't bleed, and in a unit built on scars and experience, she hadn't been tested. Not yet. The war didn't hand out respect for free. That truth landed heavy on her chest every time she passed the others in the mess hall. Every time a joke slipped through the air. She's too analytical. She freezes under fire. She hesitates. That's dangerous. She heard it all, and she never answered. Instead, she worked harder. Nights stretched longer. Calculations piled higher. Her bunk transformed into a laboratory of war. Wind charts, humidity graphs, test rounds, custom trigger adjustments. She recalibrated her Barrett's cheek rest, tuned the trigger tension by fractions, logged every variable until it wasn't a theory anymore. But even as her hands worked, her heart wrestled with the silence, because silence was safe. But silence also meant no one truly saw her. And so the question remained, unspoken, unanswered. When? The time came, when chaos finally demanded more than numbers. Would she stand? Or would the ghost fade into the dust? Why did they pair her with Briggs again? Was it punishment? A test? Or just someone's idea of a cruel joke? The training exercise looked simple on paper. Overwatch on a mock village. Targets hidden at 1,000 yards. Identify, eliminate, report, standard drills the SEALs could do half asleep. But war never unfolded like paper drills, and Kane knew it. Briggs grinned when the assignment was read. He leaned back, chewing gum, the sun sharp on his sunglasses. Guess they want to see if the mathlete can count past 10. The others laughed, not cruelly this time, but with that sharp edge of male pride trying to shield itself. She didn't rise to it, just nodded, checked her Barrett, and followed Briggs to the overlook. The exercise began with him. He rattled off calls like a man reciting lines. 2 tangos rooftop left, 1 on the street with an AK. Firing order left, right, center. Bang, 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 3 steel pings. Echoed back from the mock village. He grinned, rolled his shoulders, and looked at her like it was a dare. Your turn, rookie. She adjusted her scope. Slow and precise. The mirage shimmered faintly off the rooftops. Shadows shifted in the narrow alleys. Her breath slowed. 3 targets, she said quietly. But there's a 4th. Back alley. Radio operator. I'd eliminate him first. Briggs frowned. He scanned through his scope. Nothing. There's no 4th. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. A second later, a 4th steel ping echoed, sharp and clean. The instructor's voice cut in over comms. Correct. Spotter hidden in the alley. Excellent identification, Kane. Briggs's smirk cracked. He squinted through his scope again, and only then did he see it. The barely visible silhouette tucked into the shadows with a radio. A target he'd missed completely. She stood, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and walked back toward the barracks. Not a word, not even a glance at him. That night, the tone in the rec tent shifted. The jokes quieted, the whispers carried more. Wait, someone muttered. She's not just sharp, she's scary sharp. But respect in war isn't handed down in whispers, not yet. For some of the men, the ones who had built themselves on scars and sweat, being shown up by someone younger, quieter, and female was a wound they couldn't ignore. She hesitates. She's too analytical. Sniping isn't math, it's instinct. The words carried sharp edges, but she let them cut. She didn't patch them over with denial. She didn't answer back. She just doubled down on her work. Her bunk became something between a laboratory and a confession booth. Data sheets covered the walls. Her notebook grew heavier by the night. She recalculated drag coefficients, humidity shifts, even the smallest variations in muzzle velocity. While others slept, she trained, not with bravado, not with rage, but with quiet. Endless discipline. One evening, Roar found her sitting alone in the mess hall, papers scattered across the table, a dim flashlight casting shadows on her face. You ever sleep? He asked, dropping a tray beside her. Only when I've earned it, she said softly. Not looking up, he raised an eyebrow. And when will that be? When I make a shot others think is impossible? He studied her. There was no arrogance in her voice, just obsession. You know, he said quietly, every sniper hits their wall. Some freeze, some panic, some just miss. She finally looked up, eyes dark, unreadable. What about you? He held her gaze for a long moment. I missed once. Not because I couldn't shoot, because I didn't trust what I knew. Doubt kills shots. She nodded, and in that nod was something unspoken. The weight of a truth she was already carrying. The next day, everything changed. The briefing room was dim, the air thick with tension. A drone feed flickered on the screen. Jagged mountains, shifting shadows. A warlord's face appeared in grainy stills. A man who had evaded capture for years, responsible for dozens of attacks. A ghost who had turned war into his personal currency. Intel had tracked him to a narrow mountain pass near the border. For a brief window, less than 5 seconds, he would cross a cliff edge exposed to the open sky. But there was a problem. The only viable sniper nest was 3,560 meters away, over 2 miles. A distance no one in that room had ever hit clean. Not once, not in combat. Briggs whistled low. That's a Hail Mary. Nobody hits that. Not even you, Roar. The room fell quiet. Eyes turned to Kane. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't ask permission. She just said, steady as stone, I can do it. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter she'd endured before. Briggs scoffed. You serious? That's luck wrapped in a miracle. Roar studied her face. She met his eyes with calm certainty. "You understand," he said slowly. "This isn't practice. You'll have one shot, less than 3 seconds. If you miss, he vanishes. I understand. And you're telling me you only need one?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." Something in her voice carried more than confidence. Not arrogance, not nerves, just precision. Roar tapped the table. "Gear up. 18 hours. As the team filed out, Briggs muttered, "She won't even pull the trigger." But Kane wasn't listening. She was already gone, mentally charting the shot, calculating bullet drop, mapping wind patterns, building the firing solution in her mind piece by piece. The mountains outside waited like ancient stone guardians, watching, silent. Somewhere within them, the warlord moved, a ghost among ghosts. But this time, she told herself, the math wouldn't fail, and maybe, just maybe, neither would she. She scouted the ridge before dusk. The ground was uneven, jagged stone cutting into her elbows as she laid prone. The valley stretched wide, 2 miles of distorted air shimmering. Under the sun, wind tugged at the sparse grass, erratic, cruel, but Kane wasn't rattled. She planted a ribbon in the dirt, watching its erratic flutter. She checked the angles with her laser rangefinder, took air readings every 10 steps, logged everything. When a SEAL spotter offered her a ballistic computer, she shook her head. "I do better on paper." He raised an eyebrow, confused, but she didn't explain. That evening, she cleaned her Barrett like it was sacred. Every screw, every groove, every inch of steel checked and rechecked. While others ate, she lay prone, watching the wind shift, timing gusts against her breath. A young Marine passing by stopped. "You look like a sniper." Without taking her eyes off the scope, she said, "No, I look like someone who refuses to miss." At dusk, Roar crouched beside her. He glanced through the scope, studied the valley, then looked at her. "You know, if you pull this off, they'll talk about it for decades." She didn't look up. "I don't need them to talk. I just need the bullet to land." For the first time in years, Roar chuckled. Fair enough. At 0430, the desert valley was still. The first light of dawn painted the mountains in bronze and gray. Kane lay prone, cheek pressed against the stock, listening for the Earth's heartbeat. A voice whispered in her earpiece. "Target confirmed. Movement in 2 minutes." She clicked the safety off. 1 shot, that's all she'd get. Her spotter, Hess, crouched beside her with binoculars. Normally sarcastic, sharp-tongued, now silent, voice low. 2 minutes out, wind steady at 12, gusting east to west. Her mind was already there, ahead of the bullet, racing through the air, calculating every shift, 7.2 seconds. That's how long the round would take to reach the target. 7.2 lifetimes where anything could go wrong. She adjusted her scope, slowed her breathing, and let everything else fall away. And then, at last, a silhouette appeared. The warlord walked casually across the high ledge, unaware, a shadow. Against the rising sun, the window was open. Hess whispered, 2.1 miles. Dead center. You good? She didn't answer. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breath held. The world shrank to a single line between her scope and his chest. The shot wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't math. It was all of it, combined in one impossible moment. She squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared, thunder rolling across the valley, and then silence. The bullet cut through 3,560 meters of shifting air. 7.2 seconds stretched into eternity. Hess whispered, almost pleading, "Come on." And then, impact. The silhouette crumpled instantly. No stagger, no crawl, just stillness. Hit confirmed. Hess gasped. Radio chatter erupted. "Target is down. Repeat, target is down." That's a confirmed 21-mile shot. Even Briggs, watching from the tent, sat frozen on the ridge. Kane clicked her safety back on, lifted her head from the scope, and began packing her rifle with the same precision as always. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she just whispered into the veil into the abyss. Radio, mission complete. And in that silence, in that impossible shot, she ceased to be the rookie. She became the ghost. Why was the room so quiet after the shot? Was it shock, disbelief, or the sudden understanding that the impossible had just been made real? The warlord's body collapsed on the ledge like a marionette with its strings cut. No flailing, no cry. Just finality. The desert swallowed the sound, leaving nothing but stillness. For a moment, even the radios seemed to hesitate. The airwaves waiting to believe what they'd just witnessed. Then the confirmation came. Target down, repeat, direct hit, one shot, impact confirmed. In the forward tent, men who had been leaning casually now sat rigid, the drones overhead. Feed replayed the fall in real time, a dark figure folding into the dust. Dead center, Lieutenant Rohr stood with his arms crossed, jaw set tight. He had seen brilliance before, half-mile kills, battlefield miracles under pressure, but nothing like this. Not at 3,560 meters, not this clean. Beside him, Briggs pulled. His head set off slowly, his hands trembling in spite of himself. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even angry. He was stunned. Stunned that the quiet girl he dismissed, mocked, laughed at, had just carved a bullet through 2 miles of chaos and made history. On the ridge, Kane was already disassembling her Barrett. Scope off, chamber cleared, barrel cooling. Her movements were mechanical, practiced, deliberate. Hess, her spotter, still had his eyes fixed downrange, as if waiting for the body to move again, as if waiting for reality to take it back. You actually did it, he whispered, still half lost in disbelief. 2.1 miles, dead center. She zipped her rifle case, expression unreadable. It was just a shot. The prep made it possible. Hess shook his head, almost laughing. At the understatement, you make it sound like it wasn't insane. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, calm, cold. Insane would have been not trying. She slung her rifle and started the long walk back toward base. When she entered the compound, the silence followed her. Men who had spent weeks mocking her now stood motionless, watching as she passed. Some nodded, some said nothing. Even Briggs muttered under his breath. "Hell of a shot, Kane," she answered. With only 2 words, "Thank you." In the operations room, the colonel waited. A grizzled man with sand etched into his skin and steel woven into his voice. He didn't bother with congratulations. He simply held up a printout from the drones. Feed, a still image of the warlord at the exact moment of impact. "You understand this is historic," he said flatly. "Yes, sir." "You just changed the rules of engagement." Kane stood at attention, silent. He leaned back in his chair, eyeing her carefully. "You know there's a press office already, waiting to make a story out of this. Your name, your photo. You'll be the face of long-range sniping. Front pages, headlines, a symbol." "I'm not interested in fame, sir." "Then what are you interested in?" "Precision and preparation." The colonel stared at her for a long time, then nodded once. Dismissed. Rohr walked her out. He didn't salute, didn't clap her on the back. He just muttered, almost to himself, "She doesn't miss that." Night. The base cook rolled out a frozen stash of ice cream, a rare treasure in the desert. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew why. They weren't celebrating the death of a warlord. They were honoring the ghost. Kane sat alone at her table, spooning slow bites. Eyes low as the others laughed and traded stories. Across the room, Rohr watched her carefully. Eventually, he sat down across from her. "You good?" he asked quietly. She set the spoon down, her face unreadable. "I'm thinking about the drop." "Drop?" "The wind shifted last second. I might have overcompensated. Next time, I'll adjust tighter." Rohr stared at her for a moment, then chuckled. "Next time?" Her eyes finally met his calm, sharp. There's always a next time. She picked up her notebook again, flipping pages, recording every detail. Because legends aren't built in the shot itself. They're built in the silence after, and in silence, she thrived by dawn. The story had traveled farther than the bullet ever had, through encrypted channels, whispered across command groups, traded like wildfire among the tight-knit sniper community. A 21-mile confirmed kill. By a rookie, by a woman, with a Barrett. It sounded like myth. Analysts at the Pentagon replayed the footage, shaking their heads. No follow-up, no correction. Just one shot, one confirmed kill. At sniper schools across the country, instructors whispered her name in disbelief. Some thought it was luck, others thought it was fabrication. But those who knew math, who knew wind, who had tried to stretch the limits of distance, they understood. It wasn't luck. It was obsession, back at the base. Kane stayed the same. She cleaned her rifle, disassembled each part with the same care as always, her gloved hands treating the weapon like glass. She logged data, recalculated charts, built new simulations. Roar found her in the armory one evening. "They're already talking about medals," he said, his voice low. "They don't believe you did it alone. Some think it was satellite assistance. Some think someone else pulled the trigger. I didn't," she said simply, wiping her scope. "I had wind, gravity, and math." Roar smiled faintly. "They'll still want your name on the record. I don't care for medals, and—" He believed her. She wasn't here for glory. She wasn't here for history. She was here because precision demanded it. But the SEALs, they had changed. No more smirks, no more whispers. Even Briggs, his pride cracked wide open, found himself standing awkwardly at her bench one afternoon. "You practiced a lot, didn't you?" he asked, eyes darting anywhere but her. "Yes." That wasn't luck. No, it wasn't. He nodded once, scratched the back of his neck, and walked away. For once, the man had no joke left in him. Roar, watching from a distance, shook his head, amused. "You didn't just make the longest kill. Shot in years," he murmured. "You silenced a whole SEAL team. That might be more impressive. But war doesn't pause for legends." A week later, the encrypted call came through. Not from the base, from Quantico. Her name had traveled faster than anyone wanted. Her shot wasn't just an operation. It was a message that enemies and all eyes alike had already begun to interpret. She was being called in, not for glory, for doctrine. For the first time in decades, the rules of sniping were being rewritten. And they wanted Lily Kane to hold the pen. She stared at the orders on her tablet. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, softly, as if reminding herself, "I didn't come here to teach. I came here to learn." But sometimes, war didn't care what you came for. Sometimes, it handed you something else. And in that silence, the ghost realized she hadn't just made a shot. She'd made a future she couldn't walk away from. Why was she standing at the gates of Quantico when all she wanted was to stay in the dust? Was this reward, punishment, or simply the cost of doing what others thought impossible? The orders hadn't been a request, a secure message redacted. Headers routed through encrypted channels, report to Quantico, possible reassignment, consultation. By the time her boots hit the pavement outside the Marine base, she wasn't a rookie anymore. She was something else, something she hadn't chosen, a myth. They called her Echo 7, no photo, no official name in print, just a coding name whispered in blacked-out files. A Marine who had fired a shot across 3,560 meters and struck history clean through the chest. Inside the gates, she wasn't met with fanfare. No handshakes, no applause, just two intelligence officers, stiff and silent, leading her through a labyrinth of corridors until they reached a room called the Vault. Waiting inside was Colonel Ramsey, decorated, dead-eyed, a man whose presence filled the air with steel. He didn't stand, didn't offer his hand, just stared across the table with the intensity of a man who'd spent a lifetime measuring the value of soldiers in silence. "You changed things," he said flatly. "Every doctrine, every training model, shattered." Kane didn't answer. The enemy knows too. They've studied the footage. They know the shot was real. You didn't just kill a man. You sent a message. Still she stayed silent. Ramsey slid a thick folder across the table. "Photos, maps, psychological profiles, charts. We need you to make it repeatable." She looked down at the folder. The first page wasn't a map. It was a face. Young, barely 19. A girl from Kentucky, sharpshooter instincts, no family left. Fierce discipline, the next. A boy from Montana, broad-shouldered, calm eyes. Rifle in hand like it was born there. These weren't just recruits. They were mirrors, versions of herself, waiting for someone to tell them what was possible. "You want me to teach them," Kane said quietly. "We want you to build the next generation." Ramsey corrected. She sat there, still as stone. For a long moment she said nothing. She hadn't come here to build. She hadn't come here to teach. She'd come here to stay sharp, to keep her edge alive. But as her eyes flicked back to the photos, something shifted in her chest. These kids weren't myths. They were human. Vulnerable, waiting for someone to show them how not to miss. "They'll listen to you," Ramsey said, reading her silence. "You're what they want to become." She closed the folder slowly. They don't need a myth. They need something real. Then give them that. And so she stayed. Weeks bled into months. Kane's presence at Quantico was never public. Never printed. She remained a shadow. A whisper passed from one trainee to another. Her methods were brutal, not cruel. Precise. She stripped away shortcuts, refused excuses. She made recruits memorize windrift charts backwards in the dark. She drilled them until they could smell humidity before they measured it. She forced them to fire after hours of exhaustion. Because war never hands you a rested shot. There are no lucky bullets. She told them flatly. Every round is earned, every breath measured, every angle lived. They called it the Kane Doctrine, quietly, unofficially, a new way of training snipers. Not about ego, not about glory, about preparation so exact that chaos itself had no choice but to bow to it. Some recruits cracked, some washed out, but those who endured carried something different in their eyes. They weren't just marksmen, they were ghosts in the making. But Kane didn't live in doctrine. She lived in silence. Late at night, long after her trainees had collapsed into bunks, she would be alone at the range. The floodlights dim, the air sharp with dew. She fired at steel plates no one else could see, let alone hit. 1,800 meters. 2,000 beyond. Each shot logged in her notebook. Each miss dissected until nothing remained. Because the truth haunted her. One perfect shot wasn't enough. Legends fade, records break. Precision had to live on the edge, or it died. One evening, Rohr found her there. He had been reassigned to oversee tactical simulations. But he'd requested Quantico partly to see her again. "You've built a storm here," he said, watching as she fired into the darkness. "I'm just giving them what I didn't have," she answered softly. "And what about you?" She reloaded. A faint clink in the silence. "What about me? You ever going back into the field?" She adjusted her scope. "Maybe, but not for glory." "Then for what?" She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, echoing across the empty range. A steel plate rang in the dark. She exhaled slowly, to keep the edge sharp. Rohr studied her in the dim light. She wasn't chasing fame, she wasn't chasing medals. She was chasing silence, that impossible balance where math, instinct, and breath met in one perfect moment. And he realized something: she was already becoming a symbol. But she didn't care about symbols, she cared about the shot. Months passed. Across the world, soldiers began applying her methods. A Canadian sniper team requested her ballistic notes. A platoon in Eastern Europe credited their survival to one of her recruits who had calculated headwinds the way Kane had taught. Word of her spread in classified. Whispers. Some believed the stories. Some dismissed them as exaggerations. But every time an impossible shot landed clean, the same question circulated in hushed voices. Was that one of hers? No one ever answered, and Kane never said a word, but even legends can't hide forever. One night, an encrypted message appeared on her secure line. Not from a commander, not from Quantico, from a man she'd never expected to hear from Master. Chief Grant Maddox, retired Navy SEAL, holder of one of the longest confirmed sniper kills in history, until her. The message was short. No fluff, no ceremony. Just words that weighed heavier than metals. Heard about your shot. You didn't just break a record. You set a new standard, respect. Maddox. Kane read it twice, then powered down the tablet. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just went back to her charts, her silence. But in her chest, something shifted, a recognition, not from the world, but from one of the only men who could truly understand what that silence cost. Still, the question lingered, heavy as the desert. Air she used to breathe. Was she meant to remain here, training ghosts for wars she'd never see? Or was the edge she sharpened every night destined to cut once more in the field? She didn't know, but somewhere deep down she felt the answer. Waiting inevitable, because war doesn't let ghosts rest forever. Why did she keep training as if her life still depended on it, even though she was behind the safety of Quantico's gates? Was it fear of slipping, of losing the edge, or was it something deeper, an instinct that told her the field wasn't finished with her yet? 3 years had passed since the desert. 3 years since that one impossible shot had silenced a SEAL team and carved her name into the fabric of whispers. Yet if you looked at her day-to-day, you wouldn't see a legend. You'd see a figure in fatigues, shoulders straight, eyes sharp, walking silently from the barracks to the range, always alone, always carrying that leather-bound notebook as though it weighed more than her rifle ever did. At Quantico, she had become a paradox, a ghost who was everywhere, yet nowhere. Every trainee spoke her name, yet none spoke it loud. They called her Echo 7, the codey name born from her record shot, but never in her presence. To them, she was simply Sergeant Kane. Quiet, relentless, unforgiving, her training methods spread like wildfire. Instructors who had mocked her at first now copied her drills. She forced recruits to fire after running 5 miles with packs twice their weight. She made them shoot blindfolded. Not to hit targets, but to feel the trigger break clean, to know when their own pulse betrayed them. She set up wind simulators that whipped grit into their faces, demanding they adjust without complaint, and she told them, again and again, one truth that had carried her across 21 miles of silence. There are no lucky shots. Every bullet is earned. They wrote it in their notebooks. They whispered it before missions. Some etched it on their rifles. It didn't take long before her students began carrying her doctrine into combat. One boy from Montana, the broad-shouldered recruit whose calm eyes had reminded her of the ridges back home, took a mission in Syria. From a rooftop, pinned down by insurgents, he steadied himself, calculated wind by the sway of smoke rising from burning cars, and fired a 1,920-meter shot that saved an entire squad. His voice over the comms had been calm, steady, almost detached. Kane read the after-action report in silence. She didn't smile. She didn't allow herself that, but she underlined a line. In her notebook, he was ready. Another recruit, the girl from Kentucky, had been deployed in Eastern Europe. Her platoon was being ambushed by an armored vehicle carrying insurgents. No one expected her to hold the line. She calculated the impossible headwind, adjusted for the drag, and fired a 338 Lapua round straight through the vehicle's windshield, killing the driver instantly. The convoy halted. The platoon survived. Back at Quantico, when Kane read the classified debrief, She whispered something to herself that no one else heard. She lived the math. Her recruits weren't just surviving. They were rewriting the rules of sniping in real time, and every one of them carried a piece of her doctrine with them. The silence, the obsession, the refusal to believe in luck. The world began to notice, quietly at first, then louder. The Kane doctrine was drafted into a formal sniper manual. Her calculations, her training methodologies, her brutal insistence on precision were codified into pages stamped classified. Across NATO, whispers of the ghost sniper traveled faster than bullets. Commanders referenced her in briefings. Instructors taught her principles as gospel, but she never spoke of her shot. Not once, still. The question haunted her, if her recruits were carrying her methods into the world. Why did she keep training like the next impossible shot still belonged to her? Late at night, she would stand on the 3,000-meter practice lane under the silver wash of moonlight. No spotter, no audience, just her rifle, and the night. She chambered rounds, adjusted her scope, felt the rhythm of her own breathing, and she fired. Steel rang faintly in the distance. Sometimes she hit, sometimes she missed, but always she stayed until the silence between shots told her what she needed to know. She still had it. Her obsession wasn't glory. It was fear. Fear of losing the silence, of letting the edge dull, because once the edge dulled, she knew she'd never get it back. One evening, Roar came to find her again. His reassignment had pulled him deeper into simulations, but he always made time to check on her. He found her lying prone in the dark, firing at barely visible shapes. "You're not done, are you?" he asked. She didn't lift her head from the scope. That shot was just the beginning. "You know," he said, crouching beside her, "you'll never get a normal deployment again. Not after this. Not after what you've built. I didn't come for normal." Her voice was quiet, but firm. Roar watched her squeeze the trigger again. Another shot cracked through the night. Steel answered, and in that moment, he realized she wasn't just training. She was waiting for the field to call her back. The call came sooner than she expected. It wasn't a formal reassignment. It wasn't even an official briefing. It was a voice, crackling through a hardened line deep in Quantico's basement. "We've got something," Rue's voice. She didn't ask for details. She didn't ask for permission. She packed her Barrett, loaded her gear, and boarded a helicopter under the cover of moonlight. The mission was in the Eastern Alps. A rogue general had seized a buyer search facility. Hostages locked inside. Encryption systems ticking toward catastrophe. A NATO team had gone into recon. 3 were dead, 2 were pinned. They needed an extraction window, and they needed one shot. The kind only she could take. This one was longer, farther, more brutal. 26 miles. Fog. Crosswinds curling off icy peaks. Thin air that clawed in her lungs. The kind of shot that wasn't supposed to exist. She studied the terrain for 6 minutes, mapped the winds, calculated drop. Then she said, calm as ever, "I'll need 11.2 mils vertical. 1.9 left." The young spotter beside her, shaking, barely old enough to shave, nodded with a shaky "Roger." They climbed dangerously high. The cold cut into her fingers, oxygen thinned, but her hands stayed steady. Through the fog, the outline of the general appeared, just a faint shadow against rusted satellite arrays. Below him, the hostages. She had 1 second, 1 angle. She waited, and when he stepped back, coat flaring, giving her that sliver of space, she exhaled. Once, and squeezed. The rifle thundered against the cliffs. The bullet carved through fog, through 4,600 yards of air, through impossible winds, and found its mark. The general dropped. Hostages secured, facility cleared, and she was gone before the debrief even began. Later, deep under DC, the footage replayed on loop. Analysts stared, baffled. 26 miles, a shot that defied doctrine. She did it again, one whispered. She's a ghost, another murmured. Roy leaned back, exhausted but smiling faintly. No, he said softly. She's the echo. And the room fell silent, because everyone knew when Kane fired, it wasn't just a bullet, it was a message. Back at Quantico, dawn broke over the range. Her trainees stood in line, rifles ready. She walked silently down the row, eyes sharp, saying nothing about the Alps, nothing about the general, nothing about her shot. Instead, she simply stopped, looked them over, and said, eyes on, mind clear. Make every bullet count. They obeyed without hesitation. Among them, a girl barely 18 raised her rifle, adjusted, and fired. A clean hit at 1,100 yards. Perfect hold. Kane gave a single nod. Nothing more. Another echo. Another shadow carrying her silence forward. And in that moment, Kane understood. The world didn't need her name, her face, or her glory. The world needed her silence, her doctrine, her echoes, because legends don't live in the light. They live in the shadows, where silence does the talking. Why did her name travel faster than she ever could? Was it the distance of the shot, the impossibility of it, or the silence with which she carried it afterward? 3 years after the desert, her legend lived everywhere war touched. She had never given an interview, never posed for a photograph, never let her face slip into the spotlight. And yet, her name, or rather the ghost of it, drifted across battlefields like smoke. Echo 7. The ghost sniper who had rewritten the limits of distance. The woman who made a 1-mile shot, then a 26, and walked away like it was nothing. The strange thing was, most soldiers didn't know if she was real. In platoon tents across Syria, in command posts in Ukraine, in training grounds in Africa, her story was told in whispers. Some believed, some doubted. Some claimed they'd trained with her. Others insisted she was a composite, a myth stitched together from fragments of other shooters and Kane. She didn't correct them. She didn't explain, because silence kept her alive. At Quantico, she remained what she had always been, a ghost. She rose before dawn, drilled her recruits until sweat carved rivers down their faces, then slipped away long before anyone could thank her. She rarely spoke more than a few sentences at a time. When she did, her words stuck like knives. There's no such thing as a perfect shot, only a perfect preparation. Your rifle is not a weapon, it's an equation. Solve it or fail it. You hesitate, you kill more than yourself. Her trainees absorbed every syllable. They left Quantico changed. Not louder, not prouder. Quieter, sharper, more precise. They carried her silence with them like a second skin. One of them, the boy from Montana, returned from another mission. This time, in the crags of northern Iraq, his report was short. A 1,950-meter kill on a hostile sniper before he could strike Allied forces. His tone over comms had been unnervingly calm. Win 7. Left to right. Target down. The after-action review praised him as brilliant. He shrugged and said, I just did what Kane taught. Another, the Kentucky girl, was decorated after eliminating a convoy threat in Eastern Europe. She stood at attention, medal pinned to her chest, eyes forward. When asked how she did it, she simply answered, I listened to the wind. Whispers spread. Soldiers began to ask one another, were these kids lucky, or had they been shaped by something darker, quieter? The truth was simple. Kane wasn't just training snipers. She was training echoes. But war adapts. If the Allies whispered her legend, so did the enemy, and whispers breed fear, but also resolve. Opposing forces began studying the recordings of her impossible shots. They analyzed the wind charts. They pored over drone footage. They even adjusted their own tactics, moving in erratic patterns, using thermal cloaks, hiding in ways designed to foil long-distance engagements. In darkened rooms across enemy lines, they spoke her coding name with a mix of awe and hatred. Echo 7, the ghost, the woman who bends physics, Some commanders began telling their soldiers, "If you hear the silence, you're already dead." It should have been satisfying. It should have felt like victory. But to Kane, it weighed heavier than any medal ever could. Because she hadn't asked to be a message. She hadn't asked to become myth. And the more her name spread, the less of herself she felt she had left. One evening, she sat alone in the armory, cleaning her barrack piece by piece. Her hands moved like clockwork. But her mind was elsewhere. Roar stepped in quietly, leaning against the doorframe. He had seen her like this before. Not broken, not tired, but caught in a silence even she couldn't quite explain. "You know you've changed everything," he said softly. She didn't look up. "I didn't change anything. The shot did." "No," he said firmly. "You did. The way you think, the way you train, the way you refuse to call anything impossible. That's you." She paused, barrel in her hands. "And if it's me, what then?" Roar stepped closer. "Then you're responsible for it. All of it." For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence between them stretched until it became something heavier than words. Finally, she whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I should have missed." Roar stiffened. "You don't mean that." Her eyes lifted, sharp, haunted. "One bullet, one man, and now the world wants to turn me into a doctrine. A symbol, a ghost story, but ghosts don't live, they just echo." Roar had no answer, because he knew she wasn't wrong. Weeks later, she sat in on a simulation dome with her newest class. She watched a recruit miss 3 consecutive shots at just under 1,000 yards. His hands trembled, sweat dripping down his brow. He cursed under his breath. Lowering the rifle, "It's impossible." Kane stepped forward. For the first time in weeks, she spoke more than a sentence. "Do you know what impossible feels like? It feels like wind in your face you can't measure. It feels like heat bending the air until your eyes lie to you. It feels like your own heartbeat screaming so loud you think it'll throw the shot off course. And in that moment, impossible isn't outside you. It's inside. It's doubt. That's what kills." The recruit looked up, wide-eyed, silent. She knelt beside him, calm but firm. "You don't kill impossible with bravado. You kill it with preparation, one variable at a time. You solve the math until there's nothing left but you and the shot. And then you don't hesitate, ever." The room was silent. Even the instructors stopped breathing. And for the first time, Kane realized her silence wasn't just her own anymore. It belonged to them too. But the battlefield doesn't stay quiet forever. The encrypted call came again. This time from higher than before, a war room buried deep in D.C. The enemy had adapted, and now they were hunting her specifically. Intel showed insurgent propaganda videos, edited to mock the myth of Echo 7, targets painted with ghost insignias. Training drills where fighters fired wildly into valleys, chanting her coding name. They weren't just afraid of her. They were preparing for her. And in that strange, twisted way, Kane understood. The silence she had once used as armor had become a beacon. And beacons always draw fire. That night, she walked the empty range under moonlight, her breath frosting in the air. She chambered around, adjusted her scope, and fired. Steel rang faint in the distance. She lowered the rifle, staring at the target across the dark. She whispered into the silence, almost as if asking herself, "Am I training soldiers? Or am I training shadows to follow me into the dark?" The wind answered only with its hiss, curling across the range, carrying her question away. And for the first time, Lily Kane wasn't sure if she wanted an answer. Why were they chanting her name across the valley, firing into empty air? Was it mockery, fear, or the cruelest kind of bait? A trap laid for a ghost? The first footage came from a drone feed. A group of insurgents in the mountains, faces masked, weapons raised, chanting in broken English. Echo 7, Echo 7, firing round after round into nothing. They painted ghost insignias on rocks, drew crosshairs into the dirt, and broadcast it on open channels, knowing it would find its way. Back to American ears, it wasn't random bravado. It was a message. And Kane understood immediately. They weren't just mocking her. They were daring her. Intel confirmed the suspicion. A high-value target, long on the radar, had suddenly gone bold. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was staging movements in open valleys, on exposed ridgelines, but only in areas where a sniper might reach him, areas chosen with care, a trap. He wanted her. The briefing room was thick with unease. Commanders debated. Analysts argued. Maps littered the table. One voice finally cut through the noise. Rurs. She's the one there. Drawing out, he said flatly. That means she's the one who decides whether this works or not. All eyes turned to Kane. She didn't move, didn't blink. Just studied the topographic map in front of her. Fingers tracing the contours of the ridgeline. They think the distance gives them control. She said quietly, "It doesn't. It gives me time." Briggs, sitting in the corner, shook his head. He hadn't been part of her world in years, but he'd come back for this op. His voice still carried that edge of challenge. "You walk into this. You're playing their game." Her eyes lifted, calm, sharp. "No. They're playing mine." The room went silent. Deployment came under moonlight. A black hawk carried her across valleys of shadow, blades thumping against the night. She sat strapped in, face hidden beneath a scarf. Her Barrett cradled across her lap like something holy. Roar sat beside her, silent, watching. "You don't have to do this," he said at last, voice low. "Yes, I do. You're not just a sniper anymore. You're a doctrine. You go down there and lose. It's not just you that falls. It's everything you've built." She turned her eyes to the dark horizon. "That's why I can't lose." He studied her face. Saw no arrogance, no bravado. Just the cold weight of someone carrying more than her own life. And he realized she wasn't walking into this for herself. She was walking in for every echo she'd trained. For the silence they now carried, because she had carried it first. The ridge was jagged, carved by wind and time into cruel edges. She and Roar crawled into position, the spotter setting up his glass, Kane planting her bipod deep into the dirt. The air was thin, the wind merciless, curling through the canyon like invisible knives. Through her scope, she saw them, fighters, spread out deliberately, moving in patterns designed to confuse rangefinders, baiting false leads. In the center, the target, the warlord who had once hidden for years, now striding boldly in the open, too boldly, a trap within a trap. Roar whispered, "They want you to fire. They'll track the muzzle flash. Counter snipers will be waiting." Kane's eye never left the scope. She tracked the wind ribbons, the sway of dust, the shimmer of heat rising even in the cold night. "They don't understand." She murmured, "They think the shot is the danger. The shot is the distraction. The silence after is where I live." Roar glanced at her, unsure if she was speaking to him or to herself. For hours, she didn't fire. She just watched, calculated, waited. The enemy began to fidget, their chanting fading into restless movements. The target shouted, gesturing toward the ridges as if demanding she reveal herself. Finally, Roar hissed, "You have a window." She exhaled slowly. Through the scope, the world shrank. Just her, the target, the wind. She squeezed. The Barrett cracked like thunder across the mountains. But the shot wasn't aimed where they expected. Not at the warlord, not at his guards, at the counter-sniper hidden half a mile to the left, his scope glinting faintly under moonlight. The man dropped instantly. Silence fell across the valley. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. The warlord froze, realizing too late that the ghost hadn't fired at him. She'd fired at the one he thought invisible by the time his men scrambled. Kane had already chambered again. The second shot cut the night. The warlord folded into the dust. 2 rounds, 2 bodies, and silence. The exfil was fast, brutal. Gunfire erupted as the enemy realized their trap had failed. but the ghost had already melted into the shadows. Back at base, the debrief was short. The commander looked at Kane across the table. Disbelief etched into his face. "You didn't just break the trap," he said. "You turned it back on them." Kane said nothing. Roar leaned back, arms crossed, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "They forgot one thing," he said. "You can't bait a ghost." But later, alone, Kane sat on her bunk staring at her rifle for the first time in years. Her hands trembled faintly, not from fear, from the... "Wait," she whispered into the silence, almost to the rifle itself. "How long before the myth kills me?" No answer came, just the echo of her own breathing in the quiet. In the weeks that followed, the mission footage circulated in secret channels. Analysts marveled at her first shot more than her second. She had ignored the obvious kill, waited, and eliminated the unseen threat first. It was doctrine breaking. It was madness. It was genius. Her legend grew. Soldiers whispered, "She sees the invisible." Enemies cursed her name in training camps. Allies invoked her shot in briefings as proof that no trap was perfect. But Kane herself felt the edges closing in, because every legend has an expiration date. Every myth eventually collapses under the weight of itself. And she wondered, as she cleaned her Barrett under the dim light of her lamp, was she still Lily Kane, or had she become nothing more than Echo 7, the ghost who could never miss? That question followed her to the range, to the classroom, even into her dreams. And the silence that had once been her strength now began to feel like a cage, because when the world sees you as a myth, there's no room left for being human. And Kane, no matter how much she tried to bury it, was still human. Why do legends echo longer than the people who live them? Is it because of the shot, the silence, or because others need the myth more than the person ever needed it themselves? By the time winter turned to spring, the name Echo 7 was no longer whispered just in war rooms and sniper schools. It was mythologized, a ghost on PowerPoint slides, her silhouette scribbled on chalkboards in training outposts. Young soldiers used her name as a dare, a prayer, or both. Enemies painted it on walls like a curse, but inside Quantico, the woman herself walked quietly through the halls with her notebook and her rifle, a figure unassuming enough that new recruits sometimes didn't realize who she was until weeks later, and even then, when they looked at her with wide eyes, waiting for her to confirm or deny the legend, she only ever said one thing: "Eyes on, mind clear, make every bullet count." No more, no less. Her trainees spread across the globe. Each one carried her silence into places she'd never step. A platoon in Syria whispered her doctrine before moving into Overwatch. No lucky shots. A recon team in Eastern Europe carried one of her recruits who made a mile-long kill in crosswinds. No one else dared attempt. Her legacy was no longer a single bullet. It was 1,000 unseen hands steadying rifles in the dark. But the myth had grown beyond her control. In a secured briefing, she listened as analysts described insurgent cells using her Cody name as propaganda. They train by shouting her name. They fire blind volleys in the valleys, pretending to kill. Echo 7. They're obsessed with the idea of her. One officer leaned back, shaking his head. "She's not even a soldier anymore. She's a ghost story." Kane stayed silent. But inside, the weight grew heavier, because ghosts don't get to be human. That night, she walked the range alone. The moonlight was silver, cold, reflecting. Off the rifle in her hands, she sat up at 3,000 meters, prone in the dirt, the air sharp with frost. Every shot cracked into the dark, every steel ping answering like a heartbeat. She fired again, adjusted, fired again. Her hands moved automatically. But her mind drifted. Was this all she was now? An echo of a single shot? A doctrine wrapped in silence? She remembered the girl she had once been, 23, freckles dusted across her face, mocked as Sniper Barbie stepping off a helicopter. She remembered the sting of being unseen, unheard, doubted, and now, years later, the pendulum had swung the other way. She wasn't unseen anymore. She was untouchable, a myth, a name painted in shadows, and strangely, that hurt worse. Because Lily Kane, the human being, had been lost somewhere between the silence and the shot. The call came again, another mission, another window of impossibility. This time, it was buried in the highlands of Central Asia, a rogue faction had fortified a mountain research base. Hostages scattered across levels of concrete and steel. The terrain was unforgiving. The shot required wasn't just long. It was cruel. 2.5 miles, heavy crosswinds, limited visibility. Roar met her in the hangar as she prepped her rifle. His face was older, wearier. "You don't have to go," he told her. "Yes, I do." He frowned. "Why?" "You've already proven it. You've given the world more than enough. You've trained dozens who could take this shot. Why is it always you?" She paused, hands tightening on the barrel. Her eyes lifted to his steady, calm, but laced with something raw. Because they don't need Echo 7 to teach. They need her to act. Roar didn't argue. He just placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of trust, of respect, and stepped back. The mission unfolded under clouded skies. She and her spotter crawled into position, lungs burning from the climb, air thin as glass. The facility lay across the valley, fortified, guarded. The target appeared briefly. The rogue commander orchestrating the siege. The shot window was seconds. Her spotter whispered wind, range, drift. But her mind was already ahead, racing downrange with the bullet. Tracing invisible lines, her heart slowed. Breath steady, she squeezed. The Barrett thundered. The bullet carved through distance, through wind, through time itself, and the target fell, hostages secured, facility cleared. Another impossible shot. Another mission where silence ended the story. But this time, when she returned to base, she didn't go to the armory, didn't go to her notebook. She walked out into the night, away from the barracks, into the trees beyond the fence line. The wind curled around her, whispering in the branches. She sank onto a fallen log, rifle resting across her knees, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel it. Not pride, not victory, exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying a myth so heavy it had replaced her own name. She whispered softly, almost as if to the wind itself, "When do I get to stop being Echo 7? No answer came, only the silence she had always lived in. Weeks later, she stood in front of her final class of recruits. They looked at her the way every group did, with awe, fear, reverence. They didn't see Lily Kane. They saw the ghost. She studied them one last time, their eyes sharp, their shoulders straight, echoes of her own silence. Finally, she spoke. "Your enemy will never be the target, not the distance, not the wind. Your enemy is doubt. Doubt will tell you impossible. Doubt will make you hesitate. Doubt will kill more than you ever will. Don't let it." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't thunder. It was steady, quiet. And remember, dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't boast. It doesn't demand medals. Dignity acts, and then it disappears. Be that. The recruits sat frozen, as if trying to carve her words into their bones. She set her notebook down on the table, closed final, and then she walked out, leaving them with silence. Months later, across distant battlefields, impossible shots began to echo. A soldier in the sands of Africa eliminated a threat at 1,800 meters. A young woman in Eastern Europe steadied her breath and fired through impossible winds. A Marine in the Pacific tracked a moving convoy across 2 miles and landed clean. Everywhere, whispers followed. Was that one of hers? The answer never came, because Lily Kane, Echo 7, was gone. Not dead, not captured, just gone. A ghost once more, and perhaps that was always the way it had to be, because myths don't live in the light. They live in silence, carried forward by those who came after, and somewhere, maybe on another ridge, under another sky, a lone figure lay prone, cheek against the stock, breath steady, not for glory, not for fame, not for history, for precision, for preparation, for the silence. Between shots, the rifle cracked once more, and then there was only the echo.